Hello, I'm Mia, and this is Crash Course Literature 11B4. Today I'm going to introduce you to the Czech-born French writer Milan Kundera and his most famous novel published in 1984, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. The Unbearable Lightness of Being looks into some of the greatest dilemmas of existence that people are faced with: love, death, politics, ascendancy, the sense of heaviness that is brought by remembering, and the one contrary to it, the sense of lightness that is brought about by forgetting. Today we're going to explore the influence of the communist regime in the country on some of the main characters' actions and how it relates to the plot's themes as a whole. Sit tight and let's begin. In The Unbearable Lightness of Being, politics plays a significant role, both as a background for the plot development as well as a driving force for some of the characters. Tomas, Sabina, and Teresa sections and integral descriptions of their characters. The plot is structured around the events of 1968 in Prague. The invasion of Czechoslovakia on the 21st of August, officially known as Operation Danube, was initiated by five Warsaw Pact countries: the Soviet Union, Poland, Bulgaria, East Germany, and Hungary. On the night of the occupation, approximately 250,000 troops attacked Czechoslovakia, with Romania and Albania refusing to participate. As a result of the operation, 137 Czechoslovakian civilians were killed and 500 seriously wounded during the invasion. The invasion, however, successfully terminated Dubček's Prague Spring liberalization reforms and secured the authority of the authoritarian wing within the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, or the KAC. It becomes obvious how lightness in the novel corresponds with the general description of the spring, and how it is contrasted with the weight of life after the invasion of the Warsaw Pact and the beginning of normalization, which was the period between 1968 and 1989, when the regime in the country was controlled by the conservative branch of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. This led to the strengthening of the regime's restrictions on the general population and the replacement of the reformist Dubček by Gustav Husak. The spectra of hopefulness and oppression of the year of 1968 in Prague is sensed on various levels in Milan Kundera's novel. For one, the reader can feel the repression by tracking the changes some of the characters go through under the hand of communist regime in the country. Communism is described as the void in a mind, the kingdom where totalitarian kitsch rules. Kundera purposefully makes no divergence between communism and Nazism, as in both cases a human being is being deprived of their individuality and subject to the precedence of the dehumanized basis collective of society, for which the author draws a parallel between the crowd and Teresa's childhood, where the uniqueness of her character was continually nipped at by her parents until she was left completely stripped of it. To define communism as a form of intellectual incomprehension was particularly suitable for the period of normalization, when, in an interview of 1979, even Kundera was prompted by the events in Czechoslovakia to notify France on the suffering of the Czech culture and, by extension, of European culture as a whole. Kundera's portrayal of the Soviet military occupation of Prague is horrifying. The foreign army brings on the destruction of the beautiful city, and the regime damns its most intelligent men and women to exile or permanent silence. There were pictures of tanks, of threatening fists, of houses destroyed, of corpses covered with blood-stained red, white, and blue Czech flags, of young men on motorcycles racing full speed around the tanks and waving Czech flags on long staffs, of young girls in unbelievably short skirts provoking the miserable, sexually famished Russian soldiers by kissing random passersby before their eyes. As I have said, the Russian invasion was not only a tragedy, it was a carnival of hate filled with a curious and no longer explicable euphoria. This passage alludes to the reality of the situation in Czechoslovakia during that time. Since the regime in itself is so strict, most of the citizens in the country are unable to openly fight back. Because of this, Kundera introduces a form of silent protest, the teasing of the soldiers by the girls, in order to emphasize the determination of Czechoslovakians to give a piece of their mind to the officials in a way that would not get them in trouble. By characterizing the invasion of Prague with the oxymoronic illusion carnival of hate, Kundera draws attention to the inherently conflicting nature of people, even at a time where the horrendous acts that harm the society are occurring around them. Most are able to distance themselves from the pain and suffering of the collective if it means obtaining individual happiness. The three main driving characters of the novel's plot, Sabina, Tomas, and Teresa, all recognize or gradually come to the realization of one of Kundera's most important notions. All adamant political ideologies and parties are fundamentally identical. Sabina, for example, examines this on a level that relates to an integral part of her being, art. At the end, she becomes convinced that communists, fascists, and religious communities and organizations all employ kitsch, bad art, and propaganda in their campaigns to their own benefit, something that does not line up with her moral compass. Tomas acknowledges this when officials from the Czech regiment pursue him and pressure him to sign a retraction of his article on the regiment in Prague. He realizes that they plan to use and misrepresent his words. His article on communism is a thing that the reader can use to trace the progression of the regiment in the country. It starts off as an innocent statement on the political state of affairs in the country, coming from the point of view of a single individual, but soon descends to an act of treason that brings the gross neglect of basic human rights during that time, such as freedom of speech, out into the light. Here is a quote that illustrates this. 2 or 3 months later, the Russians decided that free speech was inadmissible in the gubernia, and in a single night they occupied Tomas' country with their army. Teresa, although an embodiment of heaviness, the regime in this sense, understands on an instinctual level that all political parties are anti-individualistic and would deny her privacy. She comes to this realization once she is stripped off of the opportunity to practice what she is passionate for, photography, because it does not line up with the image the party would like to have for the public. By the end of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, none of those played characters will be willing to join in a political rally, in contrast to France, for example, and hence all could be identified as apolitical. The main characters in the novel possess ascending ideals, morally high, connected to the integral plot development opposition of lightness and weight. Tomas embodies the uncertainty between being loyal to Teresa and freedom of the soul. Teresa expresses the morality in being entirely devoted to Tomas, but at the same time being depleted by this commitment. Sabina represents the lightness in life and in death, sometimes insufferable. And finally, Franz, embodying weight with his idealistic views. These 4 characters all fall in the category of intellectuals of that time: doctor, artist, photographer, and a university professor. Intellectuals were the main force that provoked the movement of the Prague Spring, thus making them the central prey of the Soviet officials. Since most intellectuals were forced to leave their homes, the theme of exile is present and integrated in the novel as a reference to what Kundera and many other intellectuals had to go through. This theme surfaces when Tomas, Teresa, and Sabina shortly flee in Switzerland after the invasion. In terms of how the communist regime in the country affected people in Czechoslovakia, the suffering of Tomas and Teresa caused by the drastic change in the structure of society, which subsequently brings on their fall in the social hierarchy, could be used as a model of the real-life downturn most Czech intellectuals underwent in the 1970s. Here is an excerpt from a lecture presented by Jan Kulik at the University of Siena in Italy on the 22nd of June 2006 that illustrates that notion. In the 1970s and 1980s, a Czech intellectual had 2 choices: to conform to communist propaganda and relinquish all attempts at original independent thought, thus submitting to emasculation and enforced silence, or to defy the totalitarian authorities and become a non-person. Either way, the lines of communication between the intellectual head of the nation and its body, the ordinary people, were blocked. Without the head as a guiding force, the decapitated body of the Czech nation blindly and aimlessly stumbled off track into a dead end, being tempted materially, even under the cloak of communist ideology, towards various consumerist vices. Ultimately, a novel like The Unbearable Lightness of Being draws attention to the destructive force of human nature in terms of both personal and political affairs. The subtle parallels between the loss of individuality in society under the communist regime and the one occurring in the characters' lives as the plot develops and as they search and explore the depths of their existence are what make Kundera's novel a masterpiece, conveying the notion how a man-caused destruction of a cultural world eventually leads to the fall of an individual's world. Until next time, 11B.